Evaluating limited edition watches and special collaborations are essential for collectors, highlighting their investment potential and exclusive allure. These pieces are often produced in finite numbers and boast distinctive, sometimes bespoke design features resulting from partnerships beyond conventional watchmaking, like ties with automotive brands or renowned artists. The Omega Speedmaster Professional Alaska Project watch, designed for extreme conditions, exemplifies the collectible nature of limited editions. This model merges technical resilience with historical narrative, boosting its collectibility. Similarly, the Unimatic Modello Uno U1-HGMT for Hodinkee reflects a jet-set spirit with its 24-hour graduated bezel in second time zone hand, enhancing its appeal and market value through functional innovation and sleek design. Beyond telling time, such watches encapsulate unique moments in history or cultural phenomena. They can appreciate and value, propelled by their rarity and the stories they embody, making them more than mere accessories, but pieces of our cultural tradition. Collectors seek and appreciate these watches not only for their functionality, but for their emblematic and artistic significance.
So Tony, we saw that collaboration with Hodinkee there. What are the key elements that define the success of a limited edition watch in today's market?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say thanks for including that, Andy. That was not a paid promotion in any way. Andy did that on his own account, presumably because he loves the watch and thinks it's beautiful and loves the collaboration between Hodinkee and Unimatic. So we appreciate it, Andy. But, you know, I think the thing that makes a good collaboration, collaborations are kind of the rage in the watch industry and more broadly fashion, style, streetwear, whatever. Watches in many ways are kind of late to the game and recognizing the potential of collaborations and limited editions and all of these types of things. The thing I always say about collaborations and limited editions that make them successful to me or in my eyes is when a collaborator, whether it's a publication like Hodinkee or another outside brand, is able to work with a watch brand, a watch manufacturer, and bring something out of the brand that was always there, either in their heritage or in their watchmaking or in the way in which they see the world or their perspective on the world, but that the brand would have never recognized or drawn on if left to its own devices, if that makes sense. So to use that Hodinkee GMT limited edition as just an example, right? I think just the cool sort of monotone vibe. Look, this is what Hodinkee does with a lot of our limited editions. We have this cool monotone vibe, and it really works with just the Unimatic aesthetic. They've got these minimal dive watches that play on a lot of these vintage Blancpain 50 Fathoms, Rolex Submariners, all these types of vintage dive watches that so many folks love. And Hodinkee just puts like a little bit of a new twist on it, right? Because of the way our designers see the Unimatic sort of design language and the things that they've done over the years. So I think to me, that's like how a good limited edition or a good collaboration can function. And you know, there are a lot that have been successful. I mean, as we record, right, there was a Tag Heuer Formula One Kith limited edition that dropped this morning that, you know, as mentioned, I've been on vacation, so I haven't been on social media, but I'm sure everyone's got a great opinion on it. But I think that's like great. You know, from my perspective, like one of the things that's great about these is they continue, whether or not people like them, they continue to sort of drive dialogue and discourse for better and worse in the community, which is, you know what, as long as it's all in good fun at the end of the day, it's fine by me.
Christian, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Hodinkee is such a fantastic example of successful collaboration, right? Successful, collaboration. You know, the bar is high in the watch industry for successful collaboration, right? And I think that most collaborations fall short of that bar. I think a great example that I use a lot, and I feel bad because I do love Bulgari. Years ago, Bulgari just put a Maserati Trident in the center of their watch and called it a collab. I couldn't disagree more. It's actually ironic because, you know, one of the folks that has spoken out so passionately against kind of illogical collaboration is the owner of Maserati, well, the grandson, and Lapo Elkan is an Italian entrepreneur who has his own faults, but he's really spoken so eloquently on what a successful collaboration looks like, right? The meeting of two brands, not the co-branding, but the meeting of two, right? And I happen to think that Bulgari Maserati missed, but Hodinkee has done a fantastic job, be it with Resins, be it with Gronfeld, be it with Oris. Another brilliant modern example was Rolex's James Cameron. Right, in 2012, Rolex equipped James Cameron on his, I guess, Challenger Deep. He didn't even wear the watch. The watch actually went on one of the pieces of machinery and went all the way down to the Marianas Trench. That's amazing. That is an amazing collaboration, right? James Cameron is not just a Rolex spokesman, but geez, he is such a passionate Rolex owner. The conviction with which he's represented Rolex over the last few decades has been amazing. So to see that watch come about is in many ways a modern day Alaska project. And by the way, fantastic pull there from history. That's a great example. So, I guess because there are so many, I think, mediocre collaborations, when you've got a really brilliant one, like some of those collabs from Hodinkee, like the James Cameron, it's special. It's just a really special moment to celebrate, even though you can't really usually get one because they're limited, right? I mean, not the Rolex, but that one was mass produced. But anyway, it's nice to see brilliance, right? I was going to say incarnate, but watches aren't made of meat, so you know what I mean.
Well, Christian, you're very much an entrepreneur. So a lot of the time on paper, the collaboration is like, oh, well, we're going to get in front of your audience and then our audience, and they can cross-pollinate, and there's a market opportunity there. But I hear both of you guys talking about, ideally, it's more than that. It's about the design, the creativity. There's something unique about bringing two entities or two companies together to do something special. Tony, any favorites in your book?
Thanks. Yeah. I think people honestly see through that a lot nowadays when it's, hey, you have an audience over there, we have an audience over here. Why don't we leverage each other to meet each other's audience, to find each other's audience and hopefully sell them stuff? I think people see through that for the most part nowadays, not only in watches, but more broadly, right? So you have to bring something more to the table, design wise, or whether it's in, the calibers or the movements inside. I think people want to see something more that like makes sense in bringing these 2 or 3 or however many companies it is that are coming together to do a collaboration. There's so many great ones. Listen, the biggest one of the past few years is Omega-Swatch. I don't know if this even technically counts as a collab because they're both owned by the Swatch Group, kind of a large conglomerate that owns a bunch of brands, right? But this is the one that kind of set the world on fire a few years ago and continues to drive a lot of discussion, honestly, whether or not people like it. Now they're releasing ones with Snoopy on the dial. There's a long connection with Snoopy and the Omega MoonWatch. And I know you've talked about the MoonWatch on your other watch podcast, so I won't go too much into depth in the history of the Omega MoonWatch. But honestly, like bringing a watch like that to the masses for $270 or whatever it is, price wise, it's very accessible. I think that's great, and that it uses the ethos of Swatch and the design and the heritage and history of Omega and the MoonWatch to do something that's great. Where they fumbled it a little bit is in the release and the accessibility of the release and it not being online and you having to stand in line for it and kind of perpetuating this hype culture and all of these types of things that are kind of some of the less savory aspects of streetwear and sneakers and whatever else. But, they kind of nailed it in idea, at least, and kind of making the MoonWatch an accessible thing because not everyone's going to spend $6,000 or whatever it is for an Omega MoonWatch, right? So being able to do that and buy into that heritage for a couple hundred is like a realization of a great idea of a collaboration in my eyes.
Christian, do you own it?
I completely agree with you, Tony. I think that the MoonSwatch was great. I mean, and I think anyone walking through any major city is just as likely to see a MoonSwatch on the wrist of a collector with a collection of great value as they are with someone that couldn't have otherwise or wouldn't have otherwise purchased a MoonWatch, right? I mean, the MoonSwatch has really brought these two groups of people together and kind of allowed them to break bread, right, over the piece. I like it. I also agree with Tony that the release plan has been a little bit messed up, right? I think originally there was a problem, and then later on, just the sheer amount of limited editions and the lack of differentiation between them, really, I think just bored people. I still do believe it's a massive retail success. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars to the brand, so God bless them. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a great example of that. Like, I couldn't have said it better than Tony, right? The ethos meeting with that heritage and design. Couldn't have said it better.
Do either of you have any thoughts on, just because both of you mentioned accessibility as being, an issue for collectors, for consumers? And I hear stories where somebody is collecting Pateks and then they just can't get them. Like, they might have a stretch where they're buying a bunch and they're like, oh, I have access, but then they don't buy for a little while and they lose access. And then they say, oh, well, in the meantime, I'm able to buy Rolexes. And then it kind of like they steered towards a Rolex. Whether it's limited edition or just the way the industry works. Any comments on, like, I don't know, as an outsider, sometimes I feel like I understand scarcity and how that's good for business, but then the skeptic in me says, well, is it just like a pretend controlled scarcity?
Yeah, I mean, I think even honestly, the idea that you think it might be sort of this artificial scarcity is proof that the brands have, whether or not intentionally, gone too far in the direction of scarcity and it being inaccessible to buy, whether it's your first, 5th, or 10th Patek. I mean, we've heard complaints on Hodinkee's website in the comments over the past few years, especially as watches have exploded in value, of how it's difficult to buy. Someone wants to buy their first Rolex Submariner or Patek Calatrava. These are the watches that you used to be able to buy after you'd had a great year in whatever profession you were. High-level profession, of course, but if you had a great year, you're supposed to be able to walk into a retailer and do it. And, look, the fundamental push and pull of luxury is the inaccessibility of it, and having to save up for it and all of these things, and having something that other people don't have, and that type of thing. But I think just the rise in popularity in watches, especially over the COVID bump, caught a lot of people at watch brands and manufacturers a little bit off guard. And brands were rightfully so a little bit reluctant to just pick up production for its own sake, knowing that, the music stops eventually and the good times sort of don't run forever. And we've seen that over the past 18 months or whatever, as the market has slowed down significantly. So I think the long term will kind of prove the strategy out that brands had in not increasing production too much to meet this temporary bump in demand. But the fact that this perceived inaccessibility that you even mentioned has turned a lot of people off from the industry is a huge bummer for me as someone who loves watches, because the reality of the situation is there are a lot of great ways to kind of waste or blow money. I'm not going to say waste money, but there are a lot of ways to buy expensive things, right? You can get into cars or wine or whatever it is. There are a lot of ways to have fun in this world. And if watches aren't there and accessible for people that want to buy them and have the money to spend on them, then they're going to go find something else to enjoy their time and their money with. So maybe we've missed the mark on some level, but I think supply and demand is balancing out a little bit now.
Agreed with Tony again. I think that I try to be an advocate for a well-balanced life, and I think that generally speaking, people do fixate and they have trouble having a balanced life, and I even mean balance with with your luxury superfluous expenses, right? I mean, I think that if you're spending all of your disposable income on watches, and yet you don't. You wince when you go out to dinner with the wife or with your buddies. I think you're missing the point. I think if you've got a Patek on, I expect you to get a better bottle of wine than the $21 bottle, and to bring over and crack open on a Thursday night or a Friday night. So I think that folks do miss, right? And it's the answer, the defensive answer is, well, I'm not into wine. Okay, but have you tried the other beautiful things that are out there in the world? I think that a lot of it is that watches are in this really interesting place where you get a lot of value out of a watch. A bottle of wine or a wine hobby or habit is very fleeting, right? You have it and then it's gone, right? Whereas a watch is this, in many cases, asset. It's a liability, I suppose, but a lot of times the values are relatively speaking, predictably stable, right? So folks can justify it that way. I also think, and I don't have research on this, but just anecdotally, I think we've all witnessed a big change in what the middle class and the upper middle class is willing to kind of portion out of their income for these luxury expenses. Again, I don't know exactly, but going back 15, 20 years, I don't think that you would have found the same percentile, composing this luxury class or this luxury consumer profile, right? I think that there are a lot more people of a lot lesser income now, even high income, but just not as high as it once was, really buying those watches. I mean, when I was a kid, you didn't see a Rolex day date on the wrist of 30 people at a restaurant. You just didn't, right? That was a very special, somewhat, unusual, thing. And that watch was always, one of the first things you went and bought if you were going to go spend a lot of money on a watch, right? I mean, that was standard issue in many ways. And now it's depending on where you live, of course, but you go to Staten Island or you go to the Upper West Side and everyone there, everyone has a considerably expensive wristwatch. And I think that's pretty abnormal, right? Not to mention Laura Piana shoes and a Range Rover. And I don't just think that is to be credited towards a rise in income. I do think it's to be credited to a change in culture and our priorities.
Yeah, that's a great point. Unfortunately, we've seen credit card debt continue to rise, and extra complex after the pandemic, because we saw people really interested in goods and then a shift towards experiences. And there are just so many moving parts. So thank you for that. Let's move to segment 3.